Why did a retired military dog keep returning to the same frozen hillside behind a house everyone had already written off? Jack's flashlight shook across the snow as Duke barked into the darkness for the third time. Wind hammered the trees, and a sharp crack echoed somewhere up the mountain. The old house groaned behind him, while the German shepherd pawed furiously at a patch of frozen ground, refusing to leave. Then Jack noticed something sticking out beneath the snow. What do you think Duke found? The old house appeared at the end of a winding dirt road, like something the mountain had tried to forget. Jack Sullivan slowed his pickup and stared through the windshield. The place looked worse than the photographs. The porch sagged toward the ground. Several windows were boarded up. Half the roof was covered with mismatched sheets of rusted metal that rattled in the wind. Tall weeds pushed against the walls, as if they had been trying to reclaim the building for years. Beside him, Duke sat upright in the passenger seat. The German shepherd's ears were forward, watching, always watching. Jack killed the engine. Silence settled over the mountains, not true silence. The distant cry of a hawk, wind moving through pine trees, the creak of old wood somewhere ahead. The kind of sounds most people ignored. Jack never ignored sounds, not anymore. He sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. 67 years old. 8 years since Emily died. 3 years since he'd sold the last place that still felt like home. And now he was here, buying a house that nobody else wanted. A short laugh escaped him. "Well, Duke," he said, "looks like we finally found a place that matches our reputation." Duke glanced at him, then back to the house, as if the joke wasn't worth acknowledging. Jack stepped out of the truck. Cold Montana air hit his face. The valley stretched below the property, framed by dark pines and distant mountains dusted with early snow. It would have been beautiful if the house hadn't looked like it was one hard winter away from collapsing. A dusty pickup rolled past on the road. The driver slowed. An older rancher leaned out his window. "You really bought that place?" Jack nodded. The man shook his head. "Son, that house ain't worth the fuel it takes to drive up here." Then he drove away. Not angry, not cruel, just certain. Jack had heard versions of the same thing all week. The realtor, the cashier at the hardware store, the waitress at the diner. Everyone seemed amazed that anyone would spend money on this property, especially him. Jack grabbed his duffel bag from the truck bed. Duke jumped down beside him. The dog's shoulder brushed lightly against his leg as they walked toward the porch. The boards groaned under their weight. The front door opened after 2 hard shoves. Dust drifted through a shaft of afternoon sunlight. The smell hit first. Old wood, dry rot, years of abandonment. Jack stepped inside. The living room was empty except for a stone fireplace and a broken rocking chair lying on its side. A section of ceiling had collapsed near the kitchen. Mouse tracks crossed the floor. Duke moved slowly through the house, not excited, not nervous. Working, checking corners, sniffing doorways, clearing rooms one at a time. Jack noticed it and smiled. Some habits never disappear. By sunset, he'd carried in supplies, rolled out a sleeping bag, and lit a small lantern. The house felt less hostile already, not welcoming, just less hostile. Outside, darkness settled over the mountain. Wind pushed against the walls. The temperature dropped fast. Jack heated a can of stew on a camping stove. Duke finished his food and took his usual position near the front door, always between Jack and whatever might come through it. Years ago, after Afghanistan, the dog trainers had called it protective instinct. Jack called it friendship. Much later, after midnight, he finally fell asleep. The dream came quickly, too quickly. Dust, heat, a convoy moving through a narrow valley, the radio crackling. A warning nobody understood until it was too late. Then, bang! Jack hit the floor before he was fully awake. His sleeping bag twisted around his legs. His heart slammed against his ribs. The flashlight was already in his hand, the old reflexes moving faster than thought. For one disorienting second, he wasn't in Montana. He was back overseas, waiting for contact, waiting for another explosion, another radio call, another name added to a list. The darkness slowly changed shape around him. The ruined living room returned, the fireplace, the lantern, the broken chair, not Afghanistan, Montana. A house, just a house. Another loud bang echoed through the night. The front door, wind had blown it partially open. Jack exhaled slowly. His pulse remained elevated. Across the room, Duke stood motionless, alert, focused, but not alarmed. That told Jack everything. No intruder, no threat, just weather. He rubbed his face. Sleep wouldn't return easily now. It never did, so he pulled on a jacket and stepped onto the porch. The mountains were silver beneath moonlight. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky. The valley below was dark and empty. Jack leaned against a porch post. The cold felt good, grounding, real. Behind him, Duke stepped onto the porch. The dog moved several feet away, then stopped. Jack noticed something strange. Duke wasn't looking toward the road. He wasn't scanning the tree line. He wasn't watching the house. Instead, he stared at a wooded hill rising behind the property, perfectly still. Minutes passed. The dog never moved, never blinked, never looked away. Jack followed his gaze. The hill appeared ordinary. Pines, brush, rocks, nothing else. "See something?" Jack asked quietly. Duke remained fixed on the slope. A gust of wind swept across the mountain. The trees shifted. Shadows moved. For the briefest moment, Jack thought he saw something unnatural near the top of the hill. Not a person, not an animal, just something. Then it was gone. The darkness swallowed everything again. Duke took a single step forward, still staring, still focused, as if he had found something the mountain had been hiding. And for the first time since arriving, Jack felt the faintest sense that the abandoned house was not the only thing waiting for them here. The feeling stayed with him through the night. Not fear, not exactly. More like the sensation of walking through unfamiliar terrain and realizing someone else's footprints might already be there. By dawn, frost covered the porch rails. Jack was awake before sunrise. He usually was. Sleep came in fragments these days. An hour here, 2 hours there. Never enough. He stepped outside, holding a steaming metal mug of coffee. The eastern horizon glowed pale orange behind distant ridges. The valley below was waking slowly. Thin ribbons of fog drifted through the pines. Duke stood beside him. The dog was already staring toward the hill again. The exact same spot, the exact same focus. Jack followed his gaze. Nothing. Just trees, rock, brush, the mountain keeping its secrets. "You're stubborn," Jack muttered. Duke's tail gave one slow wag. Jack smiled despite himself. Then he got to work. The house wasn't going to repair itself. By mid-morning, he'd climbed onto the roof. Cold wind pushed against him as he replaced loose metal sheets. Every movement felt familiar. Measure, adjust, secure, repeat. Combat engineers spent years solving practical problems. Buildings didn't care about emotions. Wood either held weight or it didn't. A structure was either safe or unsafe. Simple, predictable, unlike people. Below, Duke moved around the property, never far away. Always checking, always watching. Every so often, Jack glanced down and found the dog standing still, ears raised toward the hill. The behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. By noon, clouds rolled in. The temperature dropped. Jack moved inside and began clearing debris from what used to be the kitchen. Broken cabinets, rotting shelves, collapsed drywall. The work felt good, physical, honest, something he could control. He dragged a pile of old lumber into the yard, then returned for another load and another. Hours passed. The house slowly became less abandoned, less defeated. Near sunset, he discovered an old workbench buried beneath decades of dust. The frame was still solid. He ran his hand across the surface. Someone had built it carefully, years ago. The kind of craftsmanship people didn't waste anymore. As he pulled away a stack of rotted boards, a rusty hammer slid free. It struck the concrete floor. Clang. The sound echoed through the empty room. Metal against stone, sharp, violent. Jack froze. The hammer lay motionless at his feet. but his body had already gone somewhere else. Heat, dust. A convoy rode outside Kandahar. Radio chatter. A young soldier laughing seconds before everything changed. Then, the explosion, the blast wave. Metal screaming through the air. Someone shouting for a medic. Someone else not moving. Jack's breathing shortened. The room blurred. For a moment, the ruined kitchen disappeared. Afghanistan returned, not as memory, as reality. His hands tightened automatically, searching for equipment that wasn't there, searching for a rifle he hadn't carried in years. A distant voice echoed inside his head. Clear the area, check for secondary devices. Move, move, move. A wet nose touched his hand. The mountain returned. The house returned. The kitchen returned. Jack looked down. Duke stood beside him, silent, steady. The dog pressed his head gently against Jack's knee. Not demanding, not worried. Present, Jack lowered himself onto an overturned bucket. The shaking in his hands faded slowly. Outside, wind rattled the walls. A loose shutter tapped against the siding. Normal sounds, present sounds, real sounds. He stared at the floor for a while, then rubbed Duke behind the ears. You always know. The dog leaned slightly into the touch. Neither of them moved for several minutes. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Long shadows filled the house. Eventually, Jack stood. Work remained. There was always work. They spent the next 2 days restoring small pieces of the property. Jack repaired part of the porch, cleared brush from the driveway, uncovered an old stone fire pit hidden beneath weeds. The place was beginning to look less like a ruin. Not good. Not yet, but alive. Neighbors occasionally drove by. Most slowed down to stare. Few stopped. One elderly woman delivered a pie and wished him luck. A teenager asked if ghosts really lived there. Jack told him the ghosts charged rent. The kid laughed. The mountain remained quiet, but Duke's behavior never changed. Every morning, every evening, the hill, always the hill. On the 4th afternoon, Jack followed him, not far, just beyond the back fence. The slope rose gradually through dense pine trees. Needles crunched beneath their boots. The air smelled of sap and cold earth. Duke moved confidently, following something. Not a scent trail exactly, more like a destination. After 10 minutes, they reached a rocky clearing. The dog stopped, sat, looked around, then stared at a patch of ground near several large boulders. Jack examined the area. Nothing unusual. No tracks, no animals, no structures, no reason for Duke's fascination. At least none he could see. The dog sniffed the ground carefully, then looked at Jack, as if expecting him to notice something. I don't see it, buddy, Duke whined softly. The sound was rare enough to catch Jack's attention. The dog almost never whined. Jack crouched and brushed away leaves with his gloves. Just dirt, roots, small stones, nothing else. After another few minutes, he gave up. Darkness was approaching. They headed back toward the house. But as they descended the slope, Jack glanced over his shoulder. Duke did too. The dog stopped walking. For one final moment, he stared toward the same patch of ground, then followed Jack home. Night arrived fast. The temperature plunged below freezing. Jack lit a lantern and reviewed repair notes at the kitchen table. The house creaked constantly. Old wood settling, wind pushing against weakened beams. Normal sounds, mostly. Near midnight, he stepped onto the porch one last time before bed. The sky was clear. Thousands of stars filled the Montana darkness. Beautiful, silent. Then his eyes drifted toward the hill. A faint movement caught his attention. Not at the top. Lower, near the tree line. Jack narrowed his eyes. A shape moved briefly between the pines. Gone before he could identify it. Maybe a deer. Maybe nothing. Yet something about it felt wrong. Years of training had taught him to trust that feeling. Behind him, Duke emerged from the house. The dog looked toward the hill. His posture stiffened immediately. The fur along his back rose slightly. Not aggressive. Alert. Focused. Then, without warning, Duke started walking toward the darkness. Toward the hill. Toward whatever had just moved among the trees. Duke. Jack's voice was calm, but the dog kept walking. The German Shepherd moved several yards into the darkness before stopping. His body remained rigid, focused, listening. Jack grabbed his flashlight from the hook beside the door and followed. The beam swept across frost-covered grass, pine trunks, low brush, nothing unusual. The mountain seemed empty. After a minute, Duke relaxed slightly. The fur along his back settled. Whatever had caught his attention was gone, or hidden. Jack stood still and listened. Years ago, in Afghanistan, silence had often been more dangerous than noise. You learned to notice what didn't belong. A missing sound, a broken pattern, a feeling that something wasn't right. The mountain gave him that feeling now. Not enough to act on, enough to remember. Let's call it a night. Duke looked toward the hill one last time before following him back inside. Neither of them slept much. The next morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight spilled across the valley. Jack spent the day repairing sections of the front porch. The old boards had absorbed decades of snow and rain. Several crumbled apart when he removed them. Others were still solid. He worked methodically. Measure. Cut, secure. The rhythm settled his thoughts. Duke stayed nearby, occasionally wandering the property, occasionally checking the road, always returning to the same hillside. By afternoon, the porch already looked better. Not beautiful, just cared for. For the first time, the old house looked less abandoned. Jack stepped back to admire his work. A distant engine echoed through the valley. A black pickup truck climbed the dirt road. Unlike most vehicles around town, this one was spotless, new, expensive. It stopped near the gate. The driver stepped out, tall, well-dressed, clean boots. The kind of man who looked strange standing in mud. He smiled before speaking. "Jack Sullivan?" Jack nodded. The man extended his hand. "Ethan Briggs." The name meant nothing to Jack, not yet. Nice place. Jack glanced at the sagging roof, the broken fence, the piles of debris. Then back at Ethan. "That's generous." Ethan laughed. A practiced laugh. Easy. Comfortable. "I own the ranch east of the valley." Jack remembered seeing it from the highway. Thousands of acres, cattle, money, a lot of money. Duke appeared beside Jack. The dog sat quietly, watching Ethan. Not hostile, not friendly. Watching Ethan noticed him. "Beautiful shepherd." "He is." "Former working dog?" Jack nodded. Ethan crouched slightly. Duke didn't move, didn't approach, didn't retreat. Ethan eventually stood again. Smart animal. The conversation drifted through weather, roads, and local conditions. Normal small town talk. Then Ethan glanced toward the hillside behind the house. Only for a second. But Jack noticed. The same hillside. The one Duke couldn't stop watching. Ethan returned his attention to Jack. "So tell me, what? How attached are you to this place?" Jack studied him. There it was. The real reason for the visit. "I'm still unpacking." Ethan smiled. "I'll be direct." Jack waited. "I'd like to buy the property." The statement hung in the air. Jack looked around. The house, the land, the weeds, the broken fences, the place everyone had mocked. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "My ranch borders several nearby parcels, makes management easier." Jack nodded slowly. "Reasonable. On the surface. How much?" Ethan named a number. Jack blinked. It was nearly 3 times what he'd paid. For a property everyone claimed was worthless. The offer made no sense, and that was exactly what bothered him. Ethan seemed to expect excitement, gratitude. Instead, Jack remained silent. The old instincts stirred. Something wasn't adding up. Combat engineers spent years solving puzzles. Bridges, roadways, explosive routes. Every problem had logic. This didn't. If the property truly held no value, why was Ethan standing here offering that much money after only a few days? Jack crossed his arms. "I just got here. Think about it." "I am." Ethan smiled again. Still friendly, still relaxed. But Jack noticed the brief tightening around his eyes. The man wasn't used to hearing no. "Offer stands." Jack nodded. "I'll pass." For the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. The silence lasted a second too long. Then the smile returned. "Fair enough." He headed toward his truck. Before climbing inside, he paused. "Most people around here would have taken the money. Maybe. Ethan glanced once more toward the hillside, then drove away. Dust lingered in the road long after the truck disappeared. Jack stood motionless. Duke remained beside him, watching the empty road. "Well," Jack muttered. "That was strange." The dog huffed softly, as if he agreed. That evening, Jack replayed the conversation while repairing a kitchen cabinet. Every detail, every word, every glance. The offer itself wasn't suspicious. The timing was, the urgency was, most of all, Ethan's interest in the hill. The same hill Duke obsessed over. 3 days later, Ethan returned. This time the offer was higher, much higher. Jack almost laughed. The increase confirmed what he'd already suspected. The property was worth more than anyone wanted him to believe. But worth what? Ethan left without getting an answer. The mountains seemed quieter after he drove away. As darkness settled over the valley, snow clouds gathered along the distant ridges. Winter was approaching. Jack secured tools inside the shed, checked the doors, checked the windows. Old habits. Before bed, he stepped onto the porch. The hillside disappeared into darkness. Duke stood beside him, still watching, always watching. At exactly 2:07 in the morning, a violent burst of barking shattered the silence. Jack woke instantly. Duke was already at the front door, growling, staring into the darkness beyond the house. Jack was on his feet before he was fully awake. Years had passed since Afghanistan, but some reflexes never disappeared. His flashlight was already in his hand. Duke stood rigid at the front door. A low rumble vibrated deep in the dog's chest. Not panic, not excitement, warning. Jack opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. Snow was falling. The first real snowfall of the season. Large flakes drifted through the beam of his flashlight. The property looked transformed, white, silent, almost beautiful. Almost. Duke stepped onto the porch. His ears pointed toward the hillside. The same hillside. Jack scanned the darkness. The trees swayed gently. Nothing moved. No vehicle, no animal, no person. Still, Duke refused to relax. The dog remained focused for nearly a minute, then suddenly bolted off the porch. Duke. The German Shepherd ran 20 yards into the yard before stopping. He sniffed the air, turned toward the hill, then back toward the house, conflicted, as if he couldn't decide which direction the scent had come from. Jack followed carefully. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The cold bit through his jacket. Eventually, Duke settled. The growling stopped. Whatever had triggered him was gone, or hidden too well to find. Neither of them slept much after that. By morning, nearly 6 inches of fresh snow covered the property. Jack stepped outside with coffee in hand. The valley was silent beneath a blanket of white. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing, watching sunlight spill across the mountains. Then he noticed something. Tracks. Not animal tracks. Boot prints. His eyes narrowed immediately. The prints crossed the edge of the property, passed near the old storage shed, then continued uphill, toward the same section of forest Duke had been obsessed with for days. Jack set his coffee down, the warmth instantly forgotten. Duke was already inspecting the tracks. The dog moved slowly, methodically. His nose hovered inches above the snow. Jack crouched. The prints were fresh, made sometime during the night. Not his, not from a delivery truck, not from a hunter. Whoever had made them knew exactly where they were going. The trail headed directly toward the hill. A chill moved through Jack, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. He followed the tracks for nearly 100 yards before stopping. Old instincts whispered caution. Observe first, move second. He scanned the terrain, high ground, tree cover, possible approaches. Without realizing it, he was mapping the area exactly as he once had overseas. The realization bothered him, not because the skill remained, because it had returned so naturally. That evening he installed motion lights around the house. Nothing fancy, just enough to cover blind spots. The next day he repaired a broken lock on the shed. Then he cleared brush from 2 sight lines overlooking the road. The work gave him something to focus on, something practical, something real. But each night he found himself checking windows, checking doors, listening. The mountain had begun to feel different, less empty. 3 days later, another snowfall arrived. Lighter this time. Duke disappeared behind the house shortly after breakfast. Jack assumed he was making his usual rounds. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the dog returned, covered in snow, excited, more excited than Jack had ever seen him. "What is it?" Duke barked once, turned, started walking toward the hill, stopped, looked back, waiting. Jack sighed. "All right, show me." The climb took nearly 20 minutes. The forest felt quieter beneath the fresh snow. Every branch carried white powder. Every sound seemed distant. Duke led him directly to the rocky clearing they had visited before. Then the dog began digging, not casually, not like a dog chasing a scent. Deliberately, focused. Snow flew behind him. Dirt followed. Jack watched for a minute, then another. Something about the dog's determination made him kneel beside him. He brushed away snow and frozen soil. At first he found nothing. Then his glove struck something hard. Metal. Jack froze. Duke immediately dug faster. The dog uncovered a rusted object buried beneath years of dirt and snow. Jack pulled it free. A thick piece of weathered metal, reddish-brown with age, partially bent. He wiped away dirt with his sleeve. Letters appeared, faded, barely readable, but still visible. Property of Ridge Timber Co. The rest had corroded away. Jack stared at it. A marker, a sign, something old, very old. The kind of thing that shouldn't have been buried on a random hillside. Duke pawed at the ground again. The dog wanted him to keep digging. Jack looked around. The clearing suddenly felt different. Not empty, not forgotten, hidden, as if something had once existed here. Something important enough that people still came looking for it. Far below, the abandoned house sat beneath fresh snow. Beyond it stretched the valley. And somewhere out there was Ethan Briggs, a man willing to pay far too much money for worthless land. Jack slipped the metal marker into his backpack, then looked back toward the forest. For the first time, he no longer believed Duke had been chasing a scent. The dog had been leading him somewhere, and whatever had been buried beneath this mountain wasn't finished revealing itself yet. Jack barely slept that night. The rusted metal marker sat on the kitchen table beneath a lantern. Every time he walked past it, he found himself slowing down, looking, thinking. The words were mostly gone, but enough remained. Timber Company, a name from another era, a clue. Outside, snow drifted against the porch steps. Inside, the old house groaned softly in the cold. Just before dawn, Jack gave up on sleep entirely. Coffee steamed from a chipped mug while Duke lay beside the wood stove. The dog appeared relaxed. But the moment Jack reached for his coat, Duke stood, ready, as if he already knew where they were going. By mid-morning, they were headed into town. The mountain roads wound through forests coated in fresh snow. Small ranches appeared and disappeared between the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few locals waved as Jack drove past. The town itself was little more than a main street, a diner, a gas station, and a handful of old brick buildings that had survived decades of Montana winters. The library stood near the center of town, a modest building with white trim and a faded American flag fluttering above the entrance. Duke waited in the truck while Jack carried the metal marker inside. Warm air greeted him, along with the scent of old paper. Behind the front desk stood a woman arranging returned books, gray sweater, silver hair tied loosely behind her head, kind eyes. She looked up and smiled. "You must be Jack Sullivan." Jack blinked. "News travels fast," she laughed. "In this town, faster than the internet." He smiled despite himself. "Sarah Bennett, that's me." She stepped around the desk. "You're the man who bought the haunted house." Jack sighed. "It's haunted already?" "It was haunted before you bought it." That earned a laugh from both of them. Then he showed her the metal marker. Sarah's expression changed immediately. Curiosity replaced humor. She turned the object over in her hands. "Where did you find this?" Behind my property. That's interesting. Why? She looked toward a hallway at the back. Come with me. The library basement held decades of local records, old maps, property surveys, newspapers, town histories. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. Together they spent nearly 2 hours searching. Finally, Sarah pulled out a large map from a flat storage drawer. The paper crackled as she unfolded it. Here, Jack leaned closer. The map was dated 1911. His property appeared near the edge of a large shaded area. Several structures were marked nearby. Cabins, storage sheds, a rail spur, and one name, Cedar Ridge Timber Camp. Jack stared at it. Cedar Ridge. Sarah nodded. That's probably the company from your marker. What happened to it? She frowned. That's the strange part. What do you mean? Sarah moved to another shelf, pulled out a local history book, flipped through pages. Nothing. Another book. Nothing. A third. Still nothing. The camp appeared on maps, then simply vanished. No closure records. No disaster reports. No mention of what happened afterward. As though someone had erased it. Jack felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear. Suspicion. The kind that had kept people alive overseas. Things didn't disappear without leaving traces, especially entire communities. Keep looking, he said. Sarah nodded. Together they searched deeper. Eventually she found a box of archived newspaper clippings. Most were routine. Timber production, local events, accidents. Then Sarah froze. Jack, he looked over. She held a brittle newspaper. Several pages had been removed. Not damaged, removed. Cleanly, deliberately, someone had cut them out. The missing dates matched the final years of Cedar Ridge. Jack took the paper carefully. The missing sections bothered him more than anything they'd found so far. Because missing information was information. Someone had wanted those pages gone. That's not normal, is it? No, Sarah said quietly. It isn't. Silence settled between them. Even the old library seemed to grow quieter. Finally, Sarah looked up. There may be another way. What way? People leave records, sure. Not just in libraries, she smiled. People leave records in places they forget about. Jack understood immediately. Attics, basements, storage sheds, boxes, old family collections. The kind of places history survived when official records disappeared. Before leaving, Sarah photocopied the map for him. As she handed it over, her finger stopped near the northern edge of the old timber camp. There, Jack followed her gaze. A faint line disappeared into the forest. Looks like an access road. It doesn't show up on modern maps. No. She met his eyes, which means it might still be out there. The drive home felt different. The mountain no longer seemed empty. It felt layered. Like something hidden beneath the surface, something waiting. Snow began falling again as Jack reached the property. Duke jumped from the truck. The dog barely waited for the door to close before trotting toward the hillside. Not to the clearing. Farther. Toward the trees beyond it. Jack grabbed the map and followed. The forest was quiet beneath fresh snow. The sky hung low and gray overhead. Duke moved with purpose. Branch after branch brushed against them. Then suddenly the dog stopped. Ahead stood a narrow corridor between the pines. Barely visible, almost swallowed by decades of growth. Jack looked down, beneath the snow, beneath the roots, beneath years of neglect. Stone. Flat stone. One piece after another. A road, old, forgotten, and leading deeper into the mountain. Duke stepped onto it first, then turned back toward Jack, waiting. As if he had just found the next piece of the secret. Jack looked down the narrow path hidden beneath snow and roots. The old stone road disappeared into the forest like a memory refusing to die. For a long moment neither he nor Duke moved. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. Then Duke stepped forward. Jack followed. The forgotten road wound through dense pine trees, climbing higher along the slope. In places it vanished beneath decades of fallen needles. In others, weathered stones still formed a clear path. Someone had built it carefully, long ago, and someone had wanted it forgotten. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no distant engines, only the crunch of boots and paws through snow. The road eventually curved around a rocky ridge. Jack stopped. Ahead stood the remains of an old stone foundation, barely visible beneath brush and snow. A building had once stood there, not large, maybe a storage shed, maybe something else. Duke immediately began exploring, nose low, tail rigid, working. Jack walked slowly around the ruins. Pieces of rusted metal protruded from the earth. Broken masonry, fragments of old timber. Nothing that explained why records had disappeared. Nothing that explained Ethan Briggs. Still, the place felt important. The same way a battlefield sometimes felt important, long before anyone understood why. He spent most of the afternoon surveying the area. The sun hung low when they finally headed home. That night snow returned. Heavy. The storm rattled windows and buried the mountains beneath fresh white layers. Jack slept badly. At some point after midnight, a dream dragged him backward again. Dark roads, military vehicles, a convoy moving through mountain terrain, someone laughing through a headset, then static, then silence. Jack woke suddenly, breathing hard. The room was dark. The old house creaked around him. For several seconds he stared at the ceiling, listening. The storm outside slowly replaced the sounds from the dream. Montana, not Afghanistan, home. He rubbed his eyes. Duke lifted his head from near the door. The dog watched him quietly. No judgment, no questions, just presence. By morning the storm had passed. The sky was brilliant blue. Fresh snow sparkled across the valley. Jack decided to return to the stone road. This time he packed supplies, rope, water, a small first aid kit. Old habits, never enter unknown terrain unprepared. Duke trotted beside him as they climbed. The dog seemed eager, purposeful, as if he already knew where they were headed. They reached the ruined foundation shortly before noon. Beyond it, the stone road continued, narrower now, steeper. Eventually, it led toward a series of rocky outcroppings. The terrain grew rough, snow concealed cracks and uneven ground. Jack moved carefully, scanning, evaluating. Years of experience still guided every step. Then Duke stopped. The dog stared toward a cluster of boulders farther ahead. Jack followed. A narrow passage cut between the rocks. Something about it looked unnatural, almost man-made. He approached slowly. The opening descended along a hidden slope. The snow near its edge appeared undisturbed. Jack tested the ground with his boot. Solid. Another step. Still solid. Then the earth vanished beneath him. The crust of snow collapsed. The ground gave way. Jack dropped instantly. The world exploded into motion. Rock, snow, gravity. His shoulder slammed against stone. Pain shot through his side. He tried grabbing for something. Anything. His gloves scraped frozen dirt, missed. Then he crashed hard against the bottom of a narrow ravine. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. For several seconds he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only pain. Above him the sky looked impossibly distant, a thin strip of blue framed by rock walls. Snow drifted down from the edges. Jack finally sucked in a ragged breath, every rib protested. His left leg was trapped beneath a fallen section of rock. Not broken, at least he didn't think so, but pinned, completely pinned. Damn. His voice echoed weakly. He reached for his radio. Forgot he didn't carry one anymore. Reached for his phone instead. Nothing. His pocket was empty. The fall had torn it away. Somewhere above, out of reach. Jack closed his eyes briefly. Years ago he had trained for situations exactly like this. Slow down, assess, don't panic. Panic wastes energy. He checked for serious injuries, cuts, bruises. Nothing life-threatening yet. The problem was simple. No communication. No one knew where he was. No one expected him back until evening. Snow would arrive again before nightfall. For the first time all day, Jack felt truly alone. Then a familiar bark echoed from above. Duke. The German shepherd appeared at the rim of the ravine, ears forward, eyes locked on Jack. Relief flashed through him. Duke. The dog paced anxiously along the edge, searching for a way down. There wasn't one. Jack understood immediately. Duke, stay. The dog barked again, then again, refusing. Jack looked up. The old command wasn't working. For several tense moments, Duke continued pacing, then suddenly stopped. The dog stared directly at him, as if making a decision. Then he turned and ran. Jack watched him disappear through the trees. Silence returned. The ravine felt colder now, longer, deeper. Minutes passed, then an hour. The shadows began to lengthen. Jack fought to stay focused, to stay awake, to stay warm. The mountain remained silent, until somewhere far above, faint and distant, a dog began barking again. And this time he wasn't barking at Jack. He was barking for help. The sound echoed through the mountain, again and again and again. Jack couldn't see Duke anymore, but he could hear him somewhere beyond the trees. The dog wasn't wandering. He wasn't panicking. He was working. The way he'd been trained. The way he'd probably saved lives before Jack ever met him. Jack shifted against the rock, pinning his leg. Pain shot through his knee. He stopped immediately, no sense making things worse. The winter sun continued sinking. The strip of sky above the ravine grew smaller. Colder, he checked his watch. Nearly 2 hours had passed. Then he heard something else. A distant engine, faint at first. Then close voices followed, human voices. Jack closed his eyes briefly. Relief arrived quietly, not as excitement. As silence, the kind that comes after carrying a weight for too long. "Jack!" the voice echoed from above. Sheriff Tom Walker. "Damn right," Jack muttered. A flashlight beam appeared at the rim. Then another. Duke stood beside them, barking furiously. The dog looked exhausted. Snow clung to his fur. His chest heaved from exertion. Yet the moment he spotted Jack, his tail moved. Just once. Mission accomplished. It took nearly 40 minutes to get Jack out. Ropes, careful footing, patience. Tom worked with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years solving bad situations. Former Marines never really stopped being Marines. When Jack finally reached solid ground, Duke shoved his nose into Jack's hand. The German Shepherd remained pressed against his leg as if making sure he was still there. Tom shook his head. "I was halfway back to town when this guy ran into the road." He pointed at Duke. "He nearly made me wreck my truck." Jack scratched behind Duke's ears. "Good work, buddy." Tom looked at the dog, then back at Jack. "You owe him a steak." "Several." The sheriff laughed. But the smile faded when Jack explained what had happened. The hidden road, the old foundation, the missing records. Tom listened carefully. Then his expression changed. "What exactly were you exploring when you fell?" Jack pointed toward the rocky passage. Tom followed his gaze. The three of them moved slowly across the slope. The snow around the collapse had partially broken away during the rescue. For the first time, the terrain beneath became visible. Tom stopped first. "What is that?" Jack followed his stare. A straight edge, stone, too straight to be natural, partially buried beneath snow and dirt. Duke immediately began digging. Snow flew behind him. The dog attacked the ground with determination. Jack grabbed a folding shovel from Tom's truck. Together they started clearing the area. An hour passed, then another. The sun dropped lower. Gradually a shape emerged. Stone walls, thick ones, old ones. The outline of a structure hidden beneath decades of earth. Tom whistled softly. "That's no storage shed," Jack agreed. The walls were massive, far larger than anything connected to a timber camp. Whatever this had been, someone had built it to last. Duke suddenly barked. The dog stood over a section of wall exposed beneath the snow. Jack knelt beside him, brushed away frozen dirt. His fingers struck metal. A rusted hinge, then another. Tom crouched beside him. "Looks like a doorway." The two men exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. The mountain wind moved through the pines above them. The sound seemed louder now, as though the forest itself was listening. They cleared more debris. The shape became obvious. A doorway set into stone, collapsed, buried, hidden, not recently, for decades. Jack sat back on his heels. His pulse quickened, not from exertion, from the realization settling into place. The timber camp records didn't match this. The old maps didn't mention it. The missing newspaper pages suddenly mattered more than ever. Someone had removed information, and whatever information they removed was probably connected to this structure. Tom stared at the buried entrance. "How old do you think it is?" Jack shook his head. "No idea. But somebody spent a lot of effort making sure people forgot it." Duke stood beside the doorway, watching it, the same way he'd watched the hillside from the first day, as if this was what he'd been trying to show Jack all along. The sun finally disappeared behind the mountains. Shadows swallowed the forest. Tom stood. "We should come back tomorrow with proper equipment." Jack nodded, reluctantly. Part of him wanted to keep digging through the night, but experience taught patience. The mountain wasn't going anywhere. Neither was the structure. As they turned to leave, Jack glanced back one final time. The buried doorway sat silent beneath the snow, waiting, and somewhere deep inside, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years returned. Not fear, not even curiosity, purpose. For the first time since arriving in Montana, he felt certain of one thing. The secret hidden beneath his land was real, and somebody, a long time ago, had wanted it to stay buried. Jack thought about that all night. The wind pushed against the old house. Snow slid from the roof in heavy sheets. The wood stove crackled softly, yet sleep never truly arrived. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the stone doorway beneath the mountain, and every time he opened them, Duke was there, curled beside the front door, watching, waiting. Just before dawn, Jack gave up. He brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The mountains were still dark. The valley slept beneath a blanket of snow. Something moved outside. Jack froze. A flash of light, gone immediately. His pulse quickened. Not panic, recognition. Someone had been out there. He grabbed his coat and flashlight. Duke was already on his feet. Within seconds, they were outside. The cold air bit through his jacket. Fresh snow covered the ground, perfect for tracking. Jack swept the flashlight beam across the yard. Then he found them. Tire tracks. Fresh. A pickup truck had entered the property during the night. Not all the way to the house, just far enough. Then it had turned around, watching, observing. The tracks headed toward the road and disappeared. Jack followed them with his eyes, thinking, calculating. Duke moved ahead suddenly. The dog stopped near one of the fence posts, growled. Jack walked over. Something metallic lay half buried in the snow. He picked it up, a shattered piece of black plastic. His stomach tightened. The fragment belonged to the motion camera he'd installed 2 days earlier. The camera itself was gone. Someone had removed it, deliberately. The realization settled heavily. This wasn't curiosity anymore. Someone knew about the hillside. Someone knew about the structure. And someone didn't want Jack looking any deeper. By noon, he was installing new equipment. Nothing expensive, just practical. Motion lights, battery-powered alarms, fishing line attached to small bells, simple warning systems. The kind soldiers used when technology wasn't available. Duke followed him from post to post, occasionally stopping to sniff the air, occasionally looking toward the hill. The dog seemed restless, uneasy. That night, snow clouds covered the stars. The mountains disappeared into darkness. Jack sat at the kitchen table, studying the old map from Sarah. The hidden road, the timber camp, the missing records, the buried structure. None of it fit together. A sudden bark shattered the silence. Duke launched from the floor. His ears snapped forward. Another bark, then another. Jack stood immediately. The dog wasn't looking toward the road. He was looking toward the back of the property, toward the hill. Jack killed the lantern. Darkness filled the room. He moved to the window, waited, watched there. Movement. A shadow passing between the trees, human-sized. Gone almost immediately. Duke exploded through the dog door. "Duke!" Jack rushed outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the yard. Ahead, Duke's barking echoed through the forest. Then came a shout, human, distant, followed by the sound of running. Jack's flashlight beam bounced wildly between the trees as he hurried uphill. Duke! Another bark, closer now. Then silence. A terrible silence. The kind every dog owner fears. Jack pushed harder. Branches scraped his face. Snow slid beneath his boots. His breathing grew ragged. Then he saw him. Duke stood near the stone road, one front leg lifted slightly. The dog remained facing the darkness, protective, alert, ready. But something was wrong. Jack dropped to one knee beside him. His hand found damp fur, then warmth. Blood, not much, but enough. A sharp object had sliced through the dog's shoulder. Probably wire. Maybe metal hidden beneath the snow during the chase. Duke licked Jack's hand once, still focused on the woods, still trying to work, still trying to protect him. The sight hit Jack harder than expected. 8 years ago he had buried his wife. Since then he had learned to live with empty rooms, empty holidays, empty mornings. Then Duke arrived, and somehow the house wasn't empty anymore. Jack swallowed hard. Easy, buddy. The dog finally relaxed, just a little. Back at the house, Jack cleaned the wound beneath bright lantern light. Duke never complained, never pulled away. He simply rested his head on Jack's knee while the bandage was wrapped. Hours passed. The storm outside intensified. Wind rattled every window. The old house groaned. Jack remained beside the dog, watching, waiting. At some point after midnight, he realized he was talking, not to himself, to Duke. The way people talk to family when nobody else is around. You don't get to quit on me. The dog's ears twitched. Jack stared at the fire. His voice became quieter. Don't leave me alone up here. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Raw, honest. The room fell silent again. Only the crackle of burning wood remained. Eventually Duke drifted to sleep. Jack stayed awake. Near dawn he stepped outside. The storm had ended. The first light of morning touched the mountains. Everything looked peaceful, as if nothing had happened. Then something caught his eye. Far up the slope, near the buried structure, part of the snow had collapsed during the night. A section of earth had broken away, exposing something hidden beneath. Something metallic, something rectangular. Jack stared for several seconds, then grabbed his coat. Because buried beneath the fallen dirt, half visible in the morning light, was the corner of an old steel safe. Jack was halfway up the hillside before he realized he had forgotten his coffee. For once, he didn't care. Duke followed close behind. The bandage on his shoulder was visible beneath his winter coat of fur, but the dog refused to stay home. Every few steps, Jack glanced down, checking him, making sure he wasn't pushing too hard. Duke ignored the concern. His eyes remained fixed on the mountain, the same way they had been from the beginning. The safe sat exactly where Jack had seen it, partially exposed beneath a collapsed section of earth near the buried structure. Snow surrounded it. The metal surface was heavily rusted, but intact. Whatever was inside had remained protected for decades. Jack crouched beside it. The safe wasn't large, maybe the size of a briefcase. Heavy enough that someone hadn't carried it up here casually. Someone had hidden it, intentionally. Tom Walker arrived an hour later. Jack had called him on the drive up. The sheriff stepped from his truck and stared at the safe. You keep finding interesting things. Jack gave a tired smile. I'm getting tired of being surprised. Together they spent most of the morning clearing away debris. The buried doorway remained inaccessible, but the safe came free. The lock had long since seized. Time had done its work. Tom examined it. Mind if I help? Jack stepped back. Tom used a pry bar. The metal groaned. Bent, then finally gave way. For a moment neither man moved. The mountain wind whispered through the trees. Duke sat nearby, watching, waiting. Jack slowly lifted the lid. No gold, no stacks of cash, no treasure. Instead there were documents, dozens of them, wrapped carefully inside oilcloth, protected from moisture, protected from time. Jack removed the first bundle. Maps, old maps. The second bundle contained engineering drawings. The third contained reports, official reports, federal reports. Tom's expression darkened. This isn't timber camp paperwork. Jack nodded. He had already realized the same thing. The documents were far newer, most dated from the 1970s. Several carried government agency stamps. Others contained geological surveys, handwritten notes, water measurements, coordinates, page after page, hour after hour. They carried everything back to the house. By evening, the kitchen table had disappeared beneath paper. Sarah Bennett joined them after the library closed. Soon all three sat around the lantern light studying documents. Outside, snow drifted across the valley. Inside, history slowly revealed itself. Sarah stopped first. Her finger remained pressed against a report. Jack, he looked up. What? You need to read this. He took the document. The report described underground water studies across multiple counties, aquifer mapping, groundwater reserves, emergency drought planning. His eyes moved lower, then stopped. A red circle surrounded the coordinates. Coordinates matching his property, matching the hillside, matching the buried structure. The room grew silent. Jack turned another page, then another. The realization arrived slowly, almost reluctantly. The hidden structure wasn't connected to timber operations. The secret wasn't buried lumber, or mining, or lost equipment. It was water, an enormous underground aquifer, stretching beneath much of the valley. A reserve capable of supplying communities during prolonged drought. The reports estimated millions upon millions of gallons. Sarah stared at the maps. Oh my God. Tom leaned back in his chair. Now the missing records made sense. The hidden structure made sense. Even the safe made sense. Someone had concealed the information. Someone had wanted control over it. Jack felt something settle into place. A puzzle finally finding its shape. Then another piece clicked. Ethan Briggs, the repeated offers, the increasing amounts, the interest in the property, the glances toward the hill. Jack stood abruptly. Tom looked at him. What is it? He knew. Tom didn't answer immediately, because he had reached the same conclusion. Ethan Briggs knew exactly what was under that mountain. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to keep coming back. Enough to offer far more than the land should have been worth. Enough to risk sending people onto the property. Sarah looked from one man to the other. You think that's why he wanted the land? Jack nodded. The answer felt obvious now. The property itself wasn't valuable. The house wasn't valuable. The mountain was. The hidden water beneath it was. Outside, a distant gust rattled the windows. The storm forecast had been growing worse all week. Tom glanced toward the darkening sky, then toward the reports. If these estimates are accurate, they are. Tom nodded slowly. The entire valley could depend on this someday. Nobody spoke for several moments. The weight of that settled heavily over the room. Finally, Duke rose from beside the stove. The dog limped slightly, just enough for Jack to notice. The sight tightened something inside him. The safe, the documents, the secret. None of it mattered as much as it had an hour ago. Because for the first time since finding the buried structure, Jack understood something else. The mountain hadn't given him a fortune. It had given him a responsibility. And somewhere beyond the windows, beyond the snow-covered forests and frozen roads, another storm was coming. Not just from Ethan Briggs, a real one. A storm powerful enough that the local news had begun calling it historic. The wind rose outside. The old house creaked. Duke settled back down near the fire. And Jack stared at the maps spread across the table. Because beneath the mountain lay something that could save the valley. And the valley was about to need saving. The storm arrived 2 days later. Not all at once. First came the wind. A steady howl rolling through the mountains like a freight train, moving somewhere beyond sight. Then came the snow, hour after hour, without stopping, without mercy. By the second morning, roads had disappeared. Fence lines vanished beneath white drifts. The world outside Jack's windows became a blur of swirling gray. Power failed shortly after noon. The lights flickered twice. Then darkness swallowed the house. Jack wasn't surprised. Years of living alone had taught him preparation. The wood stove remained hot, lanterns were ready, water containers sat filled beside the kitchen wall. Duke lay near the fire. His injured shoulder was healing, but the dog still favored the leg occasionally. Jack noticed every limp, every hesitation, every sign of discomfort. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow hammered the windows, the radio crackled with emergency reports, road closures, vehicle accidents, power outages. Several ranches completely cut off from town. By evening, Sheriff Tom Walker called using a satellite phone. The connection faded in and out beneath the storm. "We've got families stranded." Jack listened. Tom continued. "The community center lost heat." "How many people?" "More than 30. Jack looked around the old house. The house everyone had called worthless. The house he'd spent months repairing. The reinforced roof, the working fireplace, the stocked woodpile, the insulated rooms. The answer came easily. "Bring them here." There was silence on the line. Then Tom exhaled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The first truck arrived shortly before dark. Then another. Then another. Families emerged through blowing snow, carrying blankets and children. Neighbors who had barely spoken to Jack now stepped across his porch. Cold, exhausted, grateful. The old living room filled quickly. Lantern light reflected from tired faces. Someone made coffee. Someone else heated soup. Children slept beneath borrowed blankets. For the first time since Emily died, the house felt alive. Not with memories, with people. Outside, the storm continued raging. Inside, warmth slowly returned. Late that night, Jack stood near the front window, watching the snowfall, listening. The old habits remained, always listening, always scanning. Years ago, it had kept soldiers alive. Tonight, it helped him notice something unusual. A sound, a groan, deep, structural. His eyes moved upward. The roof. Too much snow had accumulated above the eastern side of the house. The load was growing dangerous. Jack grabbed a flashlight, immediately headed toward the hallway. Duke. The dog was already standing, as if he understood. Halfway down the corridor, Duke suddenly barked, a sharp warning. The kind Jack had learned never to ignore. The dog rushed ahead, straight toward a guest room. Jack followed. Inside, 2 children slept beneath heavy blankets. Their mother sat nearby reading by lantern light. The room appeared normal. Then Duke began barking directly at the ceiling. Jack's stomach tightened. Another groan echoed overhead. Louder this time. He looked up. A beam, the old timber beam, had begun to bow, only slightly, but enough. "Everybody out." The mother blinked. "What? Now?" His voice left no room for argument. She grabbed the children immediately. They hurried into the hallway. The moment they cleared the doorway, a violent crack split the air. The beam failed. Part of the ceiling collapsed onto the bed where the children had been sleeping seconds earlier. Dust filled the room. Wood shattered. The entire house fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then one of the children started crying. His mother hugged him tightly. Jack looked down at Duke. The German Shepherd stood calmly beside him, watching the damaged room, watching the danger disappear. The dog had sensed it before anyone else. Again, a hand settled on Jack's shoulder. Tom Walker. The sheriff had arrived sometime during the commotion. He stared at the collapsed ceiling, then at Duke. "That dog keeps earning his food." A faint smile crossed Jack's face. "He's overqualified." For the first time in days, laughter filled the house. Brief, nervous, but real. The storm reached its peak overnight. Wind speeds climbed higher. Snow drifts buried vehicles completely. The mountain disappeared beneath a white wall. Then another problem emerged: water. The town's emergency reserves were running dangerously low. Frozen pipes, damaged pumps, blocked access roads. Tom gathered everyone around the kitchen table shortly after dawn. The concern on his face said enough. Jack already knew the reports from the safe, the maps, the aquifer, the hidden infrastructure beneath the mountain. He looked toward Sarah. She understood immediately. So did Tom. The secret buried beneath the hillside was no longer just history, it was survival. Outside, the storm finally began to weaken. Sunlight pushed through the clouds for the first time in days. The valley below remained buried beneath snow. But something else was beginning to emerge. Hope, because beneath Jack's land lay enough water to help an entire community. And for the first time, the secret hidden beneath the mountain was about to become public. The storm passed slowly, not with a dramatic ending, not with clear skies and sunshine, just a gradual easing of the wind, a little less snow, a little more visibility, a little more hope. By the third day, plows finally reached the valley roads. Utility crews began restoring power. People emerged from homes and shelters to assess the damage. Fences had vanished. Barn roofs had collapsed. Water systems across several properties had failed. Yet the worst predictions had somehow been avoided. Many people credited luck. Others credited preparation. Most of them credited the old abandoned house on the mountain. The house nobody wanted. The house that had sheltered dozens of people through the storm. Jack disliked attention. He spent most of the following week helping neighbors clear debris, repairing damaged structures, checking on elderly residents, doing the sort of work that needed doing. Nothing more, nothing less. Meanwhile, Sheriff Tom Walker and county officials reviewed the documents recovered from the safe. The process moved faster than expected. The reports were legitimate. The surveys were legitimate. The geological data was legitimate. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The hidden aquifer was real, and somebody had known about it long before Jack arrived. The first public meeting took place in the town hall. Every chair was occupied. People lined the walls. Others stood near the doors. Sarah Bennett sat near the front. Tom Walker stood beside county representatives. Jack remained near the back, exactly where he preferred to be. Duke rested at his feet. The dog appeared calm, but every so often Jack noticed him favoring his injured shoulder, just slightly, enough to bother him. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Maps were displayed, reports were reviewed, questions filled the room. Then came the moment everyone remembered. One county official projected a series of land records onto a screen. Ownership requests, purchase attempts, survey permits, corporate inquiries. A pattern emerged quickly. The same name appeared again and again. Ethan Briggs. The room grew quiet. Several people exchanged glances. Others frowned. The official continued. Years earlier, Ethan had quietly attempted to acquire multiple properties surrounding the valley, including parcels directly above sections of the aquifer. Most purchases had failed. Some had succeeded. None of it had seemed unusual at the time. Now it looked very different. A rancher near the front stood up. "You mean he knew?" Nobody answered immediately. They didn't need to. The documents answered for them. Ethan hadn't created the secret, but he had discovered enough of it to understand its value. And he had spent years trying to position himself around it. The room erupted into conversation, not anger, disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper. Ethan Briggs had been respected, trusted. That trust was disappearing. Jack looked toward the back of the room. Ethan wasn't there. For the first time since moving to Montana, Jack felt no satisfaction, no victory, only relief. The secret was no longer hidden. It belonged to the community now. Not one man, not one ranch, everyone. When the meeting ended, people approached Jack. Some thanked him. Others shook his hand. Several asked about Duke. The dog received more attention than anyone else. Children especially seemed drawn to him. Duke tolerated every scratch behind the ears with quiet dignity. By sunset, the town hall had emptied. Snow reflected the fading orange light. The mountains stood silent beyond the valley. For the first time in months, Jack felt something close to peace. Then he noticed Duke stumble. Only once. A small misstep, barely noticeable. But Jack noticed. That night he watched the dog carefully. The next morning he watched him again. The limp remained. subtle, persistent. The wound from the hillside had mostly healed. This was different. Duke still ate, still worked, still followed him everywhere. Yet something wasn't right. 3 days later, Jack scheduled an appointment with the veterinarian in the next county. The drive felt longer than usual. Snow-covered fields passed outside the truck windows. Duke rode quietly in the passenger seat, the same seat he'd occupied since the day they met. The veterinarian was kind, experienced, patient. She examined Duke thoroughly. X-rays followed, then more waiting. Jack sat in a small room staring at a faded wildlife calendar on the wall. His knee bounced unconsciously, the same way it used to before difficult briefings overseas. The same feeling, different battlefield. The veterinarian eventually returned carrying several images. She sat across from him, too carefully, too gently. Jack recognized the posture immediately. He had seen it before. Hospitals, military bases, funeral notifications. People preparing to deliver news nobody wants. The room felt smaller. The veterinarian folded her hands. Duke is a remarkable dog. Jack swallowed. His eyes drifted toward the German shepherd lying quietly on the floor. Duke looked back at him, trusting, unaware. The veterinarian continued speaking. Her voice remained calm, professional, but Jack barely heard the first few words, because the expression on her face had already told him everything he needed to know. Outside the clinic window, snow drifted across the parking lot. Inside, the future suddenly felt uncertain. And for the first time since surviving the mountain, the storm, and the secrets beneath the valley, Jack found himself facing something he couldn't repair with tools, determination, or experience. Something far more personal, something that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. The veterinarian spoke gently. The words came slowly, carefully, as though she understood that some news deserved respect. Duke's shoulder injury was healing. That wasn't the problem. The scans had revealed severe arthritis in one of his hips. Years of work, years of training, years of running, jumping, searching, protecting, the kind of wear common in working dogs. The condition could be managed, treated, slowed, but not reversed. Jack listened quietly. The room felt distant, muted. The veterinarian continued explaining medications, therapy, supplements, and future options. Jack nodded when appropriate, asked practical questions, the same way he'd approached every problem his entire life. Yet a single thought kept returning. Time. No amount of training could defeat it. No amount of determination could negotiate with it. When the appointment ended, Duke stood and walked toward him. The limp was barely noticeable. But now Jack couldn't stop seeing it. The drive home was quiet. Snow-covered fields rolled past the truck windows. The mountains waited beneath a pale winter sky. Duke rested his head against the passenger door, content, trusting, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place. Jack reached over and scratched behind the dog's ears. The German shepherd's tail thumped once against the seat. That simple gesture nearly broke him. Weeks passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. Roads reopened. Repairs continued. County officials finalized plans to protect the aquifer beneath the mountain. The reports recovered from the safe eventually became public record. The hidden history spread throughout the region. Newspaper stories followed. State agencies became involved. Environmental experts visited the valley. Most importantly, the water resources beneath the mountain were placed under community protection. Nobody would own them. Nobody would control them. Not Ethan Briggs, not corporations, not investors. The valley itself would benefit. Ethan quietly disappeared from public life. His reputation never fully recovered. People remembered what he had tried to do. Yet Jack found little satisfaction in that. His attention remained focused elsewhere. On the dog sleeping near the fireplace. On the dog following him through every repair project. On the dog who still insisted on checking the property every morning, despite the stiffness in his leg. Spring arrived. Snow melted from the hillsides. Wildflowers returned. The hidden stone road became easier to see. The buried structure remained preserved as a historical site. Visitors occasionally stopped to ask questions. Children especially loved hearing the story. Not about the aquifer, not about the documents, not about the safe. About Duke, always Duke. A year passed. The abandoned house changed completely. The sagging porch was gone. The roof stood strong. Fresh paint covered the walls. The gardens flourished. New fencing lined the property. People no longer called it the worthless house. Most simply called it Sullivan House. A place where neighbors gathered. A place where travelers stopped. A place where stories lived. One evening near the end of summer, Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset. Golden light spilled across the valley. The mountains glowed beneath the fading sky. Voices drifted upward from a community picnic taking place near the lower meadow. Children laughed. Dogs barked. Someone played guitar. The sound carried gently through the evening air. Duke lay beside him. Older now, a little slower, more gray around the muzzle, but still Duke, still watching, still present. A young boy wandered up the porch steps, maybe 10 years old. One of the local ranch kids. He carried a soda in one hand and stopped beside Jack's chair. "Mr. Sullivan?" Jack smiled. "That's me." The boy pointed toward the valley. "Is it true people wanted to buy this place before?" "Some did." The boy looked around, then toward Duke. "Why?" Jack considered the question. The mountains stood silent before him. The old stone road rested somewhere beyond the trees. The buried structure remained hidden beneath history. The valley below shimmered in the evening light. A year ago he had arrived with almost nothing. A damaged house. Too many memories. Too many empty rooms. Then the boy asked another question, the one Jack would remember for the rest of his life. "What was the best thing you found up here?" The child expected an answer about water, or history, or hidden secrets. Most people did. Jack looked toward the mountain, then toward the valley, then finally toward Duke. The German shepherd slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met. For a moment neither moved, neither needed to. Jack smiled, a genuine smile, the kind that comes from understanding something simple and true. He reached down and rested his hand on Duke's neck. The dog leaned gently into the touch. The boy followed his gaze, and suddenly seemed to understand. No explanation was necessary. The sunset deepened. The valley glowed gold. Below them, the community continued celebrating. Life moved forward, as it always did. The house people once claimed wasn't worth $1, still stood proudly against the mountains. The aquifer remained protected. The town had survived. The valley had endured, and Jack no longer lived alone. Years earlier he had come to the mountain believing he was buying a broken house. Instead, he had found purpose, friendship, community, and a reason to keep moving forward. The mountains darkened. Stars began appearing overhead. Duke settled beside him, the same place he had chosen on the very first night, guarding the door, watching the world, just as he always had. People once said the abandoned house was worth $0. But the most valuable thing hidden there had never been buried beneath the mountain. It had been sitting beside him all along. If Duke's loyalty touched your heart, leave a simple 1 in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog, a friend, or a family member who stayed by your side during the hardest times, leave a 0 below. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to subscribe and join our community. There are many more powerful stories of veterans, loyal dogs, hidden secrets, second chances, and unforgettable journeys still ahead. Until next time, take care of the people who stand beside you when life gets difficult, because those are often the greatest treasures we'll ever find.